Everything is communicating. Everything has a particular symbol that it is using to point to a meaning. And that indicant may be verbal or non-verbal. Today we're going to look at those because understanding this point can increase your perception and recognition of the signs in the world and the signs of God. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. نويت التعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على تمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعاء إلى الهدى ودلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Bismillah. So today we're going to talk about these different types of indicants. But before that, I want to just touch back on what we spoke of last week. Tasawwur and tasdiq, which is conceptualization and arriving at a judgment. Now, we talked about the importance of conceptualization, but we never quite touched on how exactly we acquire knowledge. We didn't really go through epistemology, the science of how we know what we know. So today, I want to very briefly, and I don't want to make it necessarily the focus of this lesson, but I want to very briefly just walk us through some of the types of knowledges. So, to begin with, we can say that there are two simple categories of knowledge. That is ilmun ضروري, necessary knowledge, and ilmun نظري. Now what's the difference between these? You have necessary knowledge, ilmun ضروري, and ilmun نظري, investigative knowledge. Well, the first one is actually defined as ما لا يحتاج إلى النظر والتأمل والبحث. That which does not require any investigation or pontification or research. It happens naturally by way of existing as a human being with senses. It is ما يدرك بالحواس الخمس الظاهرة. It is that which is known by way of the five outward senses. So what are they? Those are السمع, hearing, البصر, seeing or sight, الذوق, tasting, الشم, smelling, and اللمس, touching. So for example, everything that you're experiencing right now is a type of necessary knowledge. You pick up knowledge that it's cold, it's hot, by way of your senses. And there's no out from that. There's no way to stop consuming that knowledge. It just happens as by way of existing as a human being with senses and an intellect. Now, of course, with this you know certain things to be true, but without having to think on them, to pontificate on them, to research about them. And that is, for example, if you go up to a fire and you feel that it is warm, you eventually come to terms with the fact that it burns. That when I put my hand here, it burns. Now that's knowledge that's derived from your senses, and it is necessary. It happens by way of necessity. But then you have نظري. النظري is almost the complete opposite. It is that which يحتاج إلى النظر والتأمل والبحث. It needs investigation and research and pontification. It needs that. It can't happen except by that. So for example, I say, what is the meaning of the Nabi? What is the meaning of the Prophet ﷺ? You can't tell me by way of ضروري knowledge. You have to acquire that by way of نظر, investigation. You have to acquire that by way of pontification. You have to acquire that by way of research, bahth. But now, let's talk about the different types of indicants that communicate to us by way of speech and otherwise. Let's say, for example, and I want to just pick out the three key components here. So we have a dal, an indicant, madlul, the indicated, and a dalala, the connection between these two things. So let's say, for example, you're sitting in your room, you're sitting in the mosque, you're sitting wherever you are in the world, and you hear. Now, that particular thing is an indication towards something. What is it? If you're sitting in your house and it's coming from the door, what it indicates towards is the existence of a human being. وجود الشخص عند الباب. The existence of a human being at the door. So that's a non-verbal indicant that has indicated towards something's presence or existence. So there is communication even within just sounds that have no letters. This is a non-verbal indicant, but there are also, of course, verbal indicants. And we define verbal as صوت مشتمل على بعض الحروف. It is a sound that includes some letters. So we have learnt that there are verbal and non-verbal indicants. We call these in Arabic دلالة اللفظية ودلالة غير اللفظية. Verbal indicants and non-verbal indicants. But what are these? What is a verbal indicant? Can you think of any verbal indicants? Well, we have a name, for example, Zayd. What does Zayd indicate? When I say Zayd, what does that indicate? It indicates towards شخص معين, to a particular person whose name is Zayd. That's what it indicates towards. Whereas when we have a non-verbal indicant, it might be, for example, look around you and see something. Like look at your computer, for example, and you see that there's a green light on your camera, near to your camera. You know that it's recording. If it was red or it wasn't there, you would know that it's not recording. But that's an indicant. So the green light indicates that the camera is recording. More traditionally, they would say, okay, if you're walking across a street and you find that there's smoke coming from a particular location, you know that there at least is a fire, whatever type of fire it is. But there is a fire because the smoke indicates towards the existence of a fire. But what are the different types of indicants from these two categories? Because they both have three. And for anybody who deconstructs the world on a regular basis, they can see these. And this is the beauty of philosophy, that it actually brings, and logic, it actually brings to mind things that you already knew, but are so fascinating to hear articulated again. But there are indicants that are وضعية, دلالة لفظية وضعية أو غير لفظية وضعية. They're indicants that are coined. We have come up with them. And they're indicants that are natural, as in they just occur by way of the nature of the human being or otherwise, or his practices. And then there are intellectual indicants. And this is what occurs by way of the mind. So when it comes to a coined indicant, it is, for example, let's say a car. What is the meaning of this term? Well, the scholars have said that this particular type of vehicle that goes along by way of its wheels should be called a car. So how is it defined? It's a vehicle that travels by way of wheels, عجلات, which differs from a boat which travels on the water and differs from a plane which travels in the sky by other means and mechanisms. So let us talk about the natural indicants now. So we spoke about the coined indicants, but now let's talk about the natural indicants, which just take place by way of the nature of human being or our customs. So for example, إذا جرح الإنسان, if a human being is injured, فيقول and he says what does that indicate towards? Or if he stumps his toe, for example, hits his little toe on the wall, and he says what does that indicate? Well, it indicates to وجود الألم. It indicates towards the existence of pain. Now, we've reached the final hurdle, the third category. And for next lesson, I think this will become the most fascinating, to be honest. But it is the dalalatul aqliya. It is the intellectual indicant, that which takes place because of the mind. So for example, you see a trace on a path or in the sand, you see a footstep, and you know by way of the mind that a human being or some other creature has passed that particular location because of the shape of the foot and the imprint on the sand, etc. Or more generally, more abstractly, that you see, for example, you see an action, and you know by way of logical necessity that there must be a doer of that particular action. So we conclude, whenever we see an action, there must be a doer. الفعل يدل على فاعل. That the fi'l indicates, the action indicates towards the one who has done the action. So, in sum, we have defined the different types of knowledge. العلم الضروري, necessary knowledge. العلم النظري, investigative knowledge. And we've said that the first is that which takes place by way of the senses, the five senses, and that the second is what takes place by way of investigation. Then we went into the different types of indicants, and we said that primarily the umbrella categories are verbal and non-verbal. That is, دلالة لفظية ودلالة غير لفظية. Then those two categories each can be broken down into وضعية, طبعية, and عقلية, two coined, natural and intellectual. And then we gave concrete examples of all of them. But we must know at this point that the primary concern of logic is الدلالة اللفظية وضعية, coined verbal indicants. This is the primary concern or focus area of logic because it can be studied to the T much more than the other categories. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.